Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, is and true. Come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Katherine Gehl, welcome to the show. So excited to have this conversation. Where are you joining us from? Are you in Wisconsin or where are you at?
So actually, this is one of the first days I'm back in Chicago this month. I've mostly lived in Wisconsin this year, and now I'm in a Chicago office. It's fabulous.
Love it. Well, I'm glad you're comfortably in the Windy City and doing well. It looks like you got great lighting over there. So is it a sunny day or just good internal
No,
lighting?
it's a sunny day. Yeah,
Oh.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Nonetheless, I'd rather be doing this podcast than be outside.
Yeah, it's weather's a little crazy. I'm in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and we had like these weird, crazy, like dry lightning strikes that they hadn't seen in decades, and it does definitely appear that the weather patterns are evolving in kind of weird and unexpected ways. So
We're kind of worried about you guys out there. I mean, right?
I was looking at a map of the fires and where I live, and it's you'd have to drive an hour to get there, but it's not that far. Yeah. So it's a little crazy, but hopefully we'll get through it. For those who aren't familiar with you, Katherine, could you just give us like a little bit of an introduction to yourself, and then of course we'll talk about the book and the current events.
Sure. Well, I think I will always and forever think of myself as a business person. I actually spent the largest part of my career in business, the last of it 10 years, running a high-tech food manufacturing company in Wisconsin, dairy products, really typical Wisconsin. And in 2015, I sold that company. And one of the reasons why I did so was in order to devote full time to the challenges of our political system. But interestingly enough, the real reason that I came to focus on politics is because I shared the normal frustrations that so many people do with what's going on, the results we're not getting out of Washington, D.C. But in my role as the business leader, I was constantly thinking about competition and strategy and everything. And I ended up figuring out that there were striking parallels between the theory of competition, this lens of competition that we use in business, and what happens in politics. And so at that point, once I saw that politics was fundamentally a protected duopoly, super unhealthy competition, and that the public interest is not the most important customer, I couldn't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, as much as I loved my company and all of the employees there and everything, this is what called. And so I've been fortunate now for the last 5 years to be able to really spend, all my time focused on political change. And everything I do is nonpartisan. I call myself politically homeless. And I think that if there were an option to check politically homeless, a lot of people would register that way these days. So I'm really, pleased to be talking to you today, because I think that you probably have a lot of followers who are saying, we can't keep doing this. Why can we solve complicated problems in every other industry? Why do we have innovation in all of our companies? And yet America, the greatest political innovation of modern times, is stuck.
So why do you feel like you are a person without a party? I think the perception from many Americans is that we have two very diametrically opposed political parties, and you pick one, and you go with your team. What's your view on that?
Well, I think those Americans are right. We have two that have any power. So if you want to be part of having any power, you're going to have to pick one of those. And even those of us that don't consider ourselves members or aren't super happy with one of them, we pick one when we go to the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we pick sometimes one, sometimes the other, but nonetheless, effectively, those are only two choices. And that is fundamentally a key piece of the problem. So let's think about this for a moment. The only thing either of these two parties has to do to win an election right now is to convince 50% plus one, essentially of the average voters, to choose them as the lesser of two evils. One thing that is not required of either side is that they deliver results, that they deliver anything they promised in the last election, because the voter only has two choices. So no matter how disappointed you are, you or the typical, voter, you still likely prefer what your side claims to be for than what the one other choice says they're for. So we have in this system of politics completely disconnected delivering results from getting reelected.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to do in our system is make it necessary that the only way to get reelected is to deliver results. And that, as we're saying, doesn't happen today. And therefore, I'm politically homeless out of that frustration for how they both work. And because when you only have two, they essentially aren't coherent. They aren't internally coherent. They basically divide up the special interest groups to reach some sort of parity at 50% each. And so it doesn't make sense in the end.
Yeah, I empathize with your frustration, especially looking at the free markets and seeing industries where it's rare to only have two choices. Like if you only had two types of cheese, that would feel kind of lame. And certainly, or two cars that you could buy every year. I'm wondering, how do you reconcile that with this election, which seems pretty important? Like, of course, they all are. Mm-hmm. Within the Yang Gang, this narrative is very touches a lot of nerves, because I think a lot of folks who watch this channel originally were supporting Andrew Yang, and he represented a very kind of like a problem solver, data driven, like, I don't care if it's left, right, like I just want to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And obviously, he was not embraced in Iowa and New Hampshire as much as we had hoped. Didn't get a lot of media coverage. And now a lot of his supporters feel torn, not because they love Trump. Some do, I guess. But they just feel like they're getting the least bad option kind of imposed on them. And they're tired of it. So that's one argument. And that's why a lot of them are saying, well, we're going to write in Andrew Yang, or we're going to vote for the Green Party or whatever. And then the other part of the Yang Gang is like, well, hold on. We all loved Andrew. That's great. But we have a very dangerous person in the Oval Office now. And yes, lesser of two evils doesn't sound like a very aspirational choice, but it's the real world, and you often have to make trade-offs. And in other instances in life, sometimes you don't get everything you want, but you kind of make the best of it. What's your take on your frustration and your desire to see more competition and more change at the fundamental level, with the fact that in 80 days we're going to be choosing the leader of the free world, and potentially another 4 years of leadership under Trump?
Yes. Okay. So this is really top of mind for so many people, because I'm constantly talking to everybody about systems change, and then they're bringing up, what's 80 days, as you point out, ahead of us, sort of the near term right in front of us. I'm pretty consistent in my response to this, which is that in any of our lives, in any of our businesses, our families, everything we do, we need to keep a balance. We sort of have to look at what we're doing today, the short term, and we have to look at the long term. You can't be successful in anything only looking at what comes up in the next 80 days. You have to also plan, again, business, personal, everything. And so I want to continue to draw people's attention to this fact. So this is my view of what's going to be fact. No matter who's elected on November 3rd, on November 4th, I can already tell you that we will not be on the road to where we need to get. We will not be on the road to solving our biggest problems in a sustainable way that can last through, multiple administrations and gain the support of a broad swath of the public, and that doesn't only get paid for by future generations, et cetera. Here's why we won't be. And I know this regardless of who gets elected. It's because on November 4th, we're still going to have exactly the same system we have now. The incentives that are going to drive the re-election prospects of every member of Congress in the House and the Senate are going to continue to be low turnout, highly ideological party primaries where you already know who wins when you get out of the primary. So one person at the top can, I believe now, it's my view, you can have someone who makes things worse, but we really can't hope that one person comes in and fixes everything for us, because that's not how systems work. So I would, of course, this year is very consequential. It's always very consequential. And we do ourselves a disservice, though, to not still keep focus on the longer term, which is say, oh no, it's so consequential that I can't also think about what we need to do to never be in this place again. Because it seems like now, election cycle after election cycle, in some ways, people seem to like their choices less and less. They thought they didn't like them last time, and now they think they like them less this time. Now, some people are super happy, and that's great for them. But in general, we don't seem to be improving in how much we like our choices. So let's get together, and now is the time, not just after November, to figure out what we need to do to change the system so that, in future election cycles, we don't have this difficult choice. And so long story short, I don't make specific recommendations, of course, about the way anyone would vote. And I recommend that we get on the system. And I'll come back to something you said before you asked me the question. We were commenting about the two parties. I want to make it clear, I actually have no problem with two parties. I don't say there's a specific number of parties that is the right amount of competition. Here's the problem. The current two are guaranteed to continue to be the only two forever, regardless of how satisfied or dissatisfied the public is, because they've protected themselves from competition. So what we need in the system is not necessarily 3 parties or 4 parties. We need the threat of new competition, better serving the customer, to either then come in, like political entrepreneurship, and replace one of these 2 parties or ideologies, et cetera, or pressure them to get results, meaning competition improves performance even when the new entrepreneur doesn't win, for example. But right now, we never have that competitive threat. So we're trying to get dynamic competition, not some arbitrary number of the right number of parties. And I'm personally fine if 7 years from now, the two major parties are still called Republicans and Democrats, as long as they're now accountable for solving problems instead of just making promises.
Yeah, so if we take your analogy of the private sector, if you had, let's call it Chrysler and General Motors, and they're just like not putting out great cars, maybe in the 80s, let's say, then, you have like little companies like Datsun and Honda and Toyota, trying to say, hey, I've got a product worth considering, and ultimately the consumers can kind of vote with their wallet, and you could see markets change really quickly. You don't see that if you say Yang was like, this disruptive candidate. He had a ton of enthusiasm. His supporters were really starting to form big crowds, but I think he did encounter headwinds, not from the Republicans, but frankly from the Democratic Party kind of establishment that were like, look, we know you're kind of out there. We don't know you as well as we know these other senators. You got to wait your turn, yada yada. What are we gonna? How do we enable like startup candidates to really shake things up in years, not decades or centuries?
Absolutely, that is the huge question, and it is startup candidates, and it is, as with Andrew Yang, startup ideas, innovative ideas, because he wasn't just a new candidate.
Yes.
He had, as you note, this data-driven, I don't care what side it's considered to be, but I have this idea to solve one of our key problems and more, so we need a system that doesn't just compete on personality and, ability to sort of get the bandwidth, but that also leaves this room for people to bring their innovative ideas to the table. Because if you think about all the policy issues, candidly, we haven't had much policy innovation for decades. We haven't even acted on what were the best ideas 20 years ago yet. But surely we could think of new and better things, but no one does that anymore because, again, they don't need to. So here's what we need to do. Right now, as I said, these two parties, so what we call the duopoly, it's a protected duopoly, which is to say it's hard for new entrants. It's hard for new competitors. And some of why it's hard for new competitors is standard things that happen in any industry. There's like advantages of incumbency, like the fact that all those senators were more well-known than Andrew Yang when they started out. So, and then maybe they had better fundraising networks, et cetera. So those are sort of natural forces of competition. It's not the problem. In this duopoly, the key problem for new competition is structural. It's related to how we vote. So this is so fascinating. How we vote in America in, let's say, the presidential primaries, although all my work is focused on changing Congress, by the way, but I'll use presidential examples to help explain the concepts. How we vote is that we say, whoever has the most votes on this day wins. And that seems super logical. Most votes should win, except that when you look more deeply at it, you say, oh, well, actually, in any election with more than two candidates, if you let whoever has the most votes win, you could very easily elect someone who has far less than majority support. So for example, with three candidates, someone could win with 24% of the vote, meaning that, 34% of the vote, meaning that 66% of the voters preferred someone else, meaning they split their votes equally among the other two. And what that creates is this phenomenon of wasted votes, or someone's going to be a spoiler. So, probably maybe other candidates were reaching out to, Yang supporters saying, don't waste your vote on him. he's never going to win. You should pick us because we're the closest to him or something. And that's a huge problem for new competitors. But even bigger is the spoiler, which is, oh, if you vote for this candidate, you'll actually ruin the race for the next person. So go back to 2016. What we saw then is in the actual presidential race, you had, of course, Trump and Hillary, but you also had a Green candidate, Jill Stein, and a Libertarian, Gary Johnson. And those people on the right who may have wanted to vote for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, were told, oh, no, do not vote for Gary Johnson because you will take votes away from Trump, spoil the election for him, and accidentally help elect Hillary. And on the left, if you really prefer Jill Stein to Hillary Clinton, you were also told, don't vote for who you really want because you're going to spoil the election for Hillary and accidentally help elect Donald Trump, which is sort of profoundly un-American to be said, don't vote for who you really want. But the point is that any new startup is pretty much always going to be considered a likely spoiler or a wasted vote. And so they can't get past that threshold because the truth is those parties are correct, meaning votes for Jill Stein did take votes away from Hillary Clinton. Votes for Gary Johnson did take votes away from Donald Trump. And when Howard Schultz was maybe going to run as an independent for the presidential race in the spring of 2019, Democrats were really mad because they thought he'd take votes away from the Democrat. So if nobody other than a Democrat or a Republican is ever allowed to get in because no, you'll ruin it for one of the major party candidates. I mean, we don't like them that much, but we'd like them better than the one other major party candidate. It's like a conundrum out of which we cannot, escape. So the way to do that, the way to get rid of that is we have to have ranked choice voting in general elections. And again, now I want to bring it back to Congress because then all voters can vote for who they want as their top choice, and then they can rank the candidates down. There's never any spoilers. There's never any wasted votes. And then candidates like Andrew Yang really have a opportunity because nobody said, you don't really know, we would never really know. Let's say he was running for Senate, but he was an independent. We would never really know how many people supported him because so many people would be afraid to vote for him. Because they'd say, I need to pick someone who's more likely to win. But if they know that by voting for him using ranked choice voting, they're not going to waste their vote, then all of a sudden, maybe we'd find out that there was a lot more support. They were just institutionally not able to express it.
Yeah, I think that aligns very well with what I saw, and I think a lot of us supporting Andrew saw when we would talk to prospective voters. You'd often hear, I really like him. I love his ideas, but, he's not going to get the nomination. So why would I support him? And you're wondering well, shoot, if I'm hearing that enough, then he might have been top 3 instead of top 6. And who knows how far he could have gone. How do you get ranked choice voting in, and why do you think it's been hard to implement it? Is it just an awareness thing, or do you think there's vested interests that are quite happy with the plurality method? Okay, so 2 separate questions there. First, I'll take the vested interest question. Yes, there are vested interests in the politics industry. So I talk about the political industrial complex in my book called The Politics Industry, which basically is the parties and all the actors, the lobbyists, the consultants, the media, everybody in and about this industry whose livelihood and revenues and power is connected to politics. And the political industrial complex is thriving, even as the American public has never been more dissatisfied, which is clearly a sign of a dysfunctional marketplace. But it also shows you that those that are thriving have optimized their own methods of doing business for the rules that we have right now. And therefore, a change in those rules could upset the dynamic of power, of a value in that industry. And so anybody who's doing really well in the existing industry mostly doesn't want to see change. I'm not saying everybody, because of course,
these are all American citizens, and care deeply about the country. So some people would like to change, but they also don't believe it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of think they're wasting their vote if they say we should reform, so they might as well just keep doing what they're doing. So yes, vested interest, that's a problem, but totally something we can overcome. But your second question is, why haven't we been able to move ranked choice voting further? And for that, I need to back up just one more place. In my book, I make it very clear that my proposed top priority solution, which is not to say it's the only thing we need to change, it's just the first thing we need to change, is to implement final five voting, which is two things. We need to get rid of party primaries, which create an eye of the needle through which no problem-solving politician can pass. They push people so far apart through the election process, they can't come together to solve problems. So party primaries are the main reason we don't get results. So we got to get rid of those. Mm-hmm. And then we have to get rid of part of plurality voting, because that's why we don't get new competition, as we just discussed. And so that's why we don't get accountability. So if we change the reason we don't get results, and we inject the ability to have new competition, which gives us accountability, we're now going to get results, innovation, and accountability. And how we do that is with final five voting. Get rid of party primaries, replace it with open top five primaries, where you have one party primary ballot and the top five vote getters advance to the general election. And then in the general election, use ranked choice voting. Now, I would not actually say that we're having a hard time getting ranked choice voting adopted, because we've just barely started. So ranked choice voting has been adopted in Maine, and it will be on the ballot in Massachusetts this November. And very excitingly, we have 3 states who have ballot initiatives for final four voting, which is the combination of open top 4 primaries and ranked choice voting general elections. And those are Alaska, North Dakota, and Arkansas. So this movement is really just getting started. And, it's like any sort of new industry. I call it this startup industry of political innovation. I mean, we have to get capital investment. You have to develop your products and your best practices, and you have to roll them out. And that's where it is. It's just a new industry, new product, new movement. But I will tell you now, having been doing this, not full-time, of course, but, really looking at this for 10 years, the momentum is really building now. It's just night and day to even where it was 3 years ago. So we're going to start to see this happen around the country.
One of the reasons why we started a few minutes late was I was interviewing Antoine Pierce, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Louisiana, where they have a jungle primary. Mm-hmm. And his argument was he's a little worried because there's only 2 people in the Republican Party running, but then there's like a long list of Democrats running. And the worry is that there are so many Democrats running, everybody's going to split the vote. And then the top two general election could have 2 Republicans who appeal to only a minority of the state. How would you, is that part of the reason why you kind of have to have both the open primary plus the RCV? You can't have one, you can't just do one and not the other, I would imagine, or?
So, look, RCV is an improvement over just plurality voting. And having open top 2 primaries is an improvement over having, an election that's already decided in the primary. But open top 5 primaries plus ranked choice voting general is like 1 + 1 = 10. Mm-hmm. So it's just so much greater than the sum of its parts. And essentially, if you want to change these rules in every state, and you change them individually in each state, when you do the work, you might as well do the work for the combination of the 2 things that's going to make, a level 10 difference, instead of spend 2 years doing the work for one and then come back later and spend another 2 years doing the work for the other one, right? Mm-hmm. So, but to this question about what's happening in Louisiana, the challenge there is 2 people in the general election is not enough, because it basically leads to always not quite enough competition in the general election. Now, in this case, you could have that odd result where, because of the vote splitting, as you described, you could have 2 Republicans. And I would never say that there's any voting system that would not, from time to time, result in sort of something where observers will look at it and say, well, that's weird. That shouldn't really have happened. That doesn't seem quite right. There's no perfect way to vote, actually, which is kind of shocking to discover. But certainly having 5, so having a primary and then having 5 vote getters advance, gives us this sweet spot of enough spaces to not have accidentally 2 real, minority support candidates crowd out a bunch of people who split the vote. But also, what we get with top 5 primaries is we're going to get a campaign that's not just about candidates. And I mentioned this a little before. It's also about ideas. So let's think about this for a moment. Let's say there were top 5 primaries in every Senate race in the country right now. How many people would run on a Yang platform next cycle? How many people would want to advance a guaranteed basic income and put it in front of the American people? Now, maybe all those candidates would be considered only as likely to win their Senate race as Andrew was considered likely to win the Democratic primary nomination. But they could, I say pretty easily, get into the top 5 in multiple Senate races, right, around the country. Sure. And then they would be advocating for that and explaining it to people and bringing it forth. And maybe some of them would end up winning, maybe they wouldn't. But what would have happened is we would have now had a lot of people exposed to an innovative new idea. You would also have some people running who said, my most important issue is climate change. You'd have the Tom Steyers running, let's say. And you also have people running on the classic, well-rounded platform where they're sort of prototypical Democrats, Republicans, et cetera. But they will be affected by this dialogue, by the debate, by being held accountable, because someone who in some ways knows they're not going to win almost has the ability to hold the others accountable. Like, what have you done on this issue? And I'll give you an example of how real competition works. Healthy competition. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but do you know when the last time was in this country, Tom, that we had a balanced budget?
I think Bill Clinton, maybe?
Yeah. It was under Bill Clinton. And do you think of that as being sort of a Bill Clinton accomplishment?
No, I think the Congress and him worked out a deal, and they kind of both participated in that.
So yes, I agree with you on that, meaning it was actually an accomplishment of Republicans and Democrats. But why did they do that? Why? Well, here's the truth. The only reason they did that is because in 1992, Ross Perot ran. He ran, most of your viewers are probably too young to remember this. Okay, but Ross Perot ran on these charts that he would hold up about the debt and deficit. And in November, and he was an independent, he ran as an independent. So he was a spoiler or a wasted vote, but he had enough money to run. So that's the only way he could sort of get past the spoiler problem, wasted vote, and still run because he could fund his own campaign. And in November, he got 19% of the vote, even though those people who voted for him probably mostly knew they were wasting or spoiling, By the way, he didn't spoil. Nate Silver of 538 has done an analysis and said he drew, from both sides. But nonetheless, he didn't win. But what did we win, the American people, from healthy competition? We won because this competitive pressure forced both the Democrats and the Republicans to care about and be accountable for the national debt, because neither side wanted to lose, neither side wanted Perot's party to get bigger, right? They didn't want a third party, the nascent Reform Party. And they also didn't want to let the other side grab all those 19% of voters from Perot to become theirs. So they were both motivated to solve it. And that's what competition does. It improves performance in an industry, even when the innovator isn't necessarily later the winner in the marketplace. And we see this, for example, in technology all the time, right? So there's some innovative new technology, and maybe either some of the bigger companies adopt that technology with their own twist, or they buy that technology. And sometimes the innovator does come up and become the major company themselves. But it's this process of innovation, and you just don't get that without competition. That's why I call this free market politics. You know, it sort of delivers the best of what the free markets deliver: innovation, results, accountability, and we need that.
Totally. I mean, as a red-blooded American who loves the free markets, I would like nothing more than to feel like my vote is really being competed for, and to keep people on their toes, and not to take any vote for granted. And I agree with you. It's kind of like those American cars in the 80s became a lot more reliable in the 90s, partly because they knew they didn't want Lexus and Toyota, eating their lunch.
It's so rational. And we're the land of the free, and we're the land of the free markets, and we have the most unfree markets in our political system, which is, perhaps, I would argue, our most important industry. And what's interesting is, guess who else isn't free in the marketplace of politics? Our actual senators and representatives. They don't even have the freedom to work across the aisle to find the best way forward. They're actually not free to do that. Their only option is lockstep allegiance to their party leadership. They can only take that vote that way and support that leader exactly. And that's how it works. On both sides, it does. That's crazy, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're not free in that sense. And we need that freedom both as voters, and we need that freedom for our representatives on behalf of the voters. And we can get it. That's what's really amazing. So when I started doing this work, one of the things that you would find is in the reform community, which I don't so much consider myself a part of. I really am very specific. I say I work in political innovation. I don't work in political reform. I don't want to tinker around the edges or make things more fair or more representative, all of which is good. I want to transform the likelihood that Congress delivers results, like be truly innovative, okay? So I work in political innovation, and what I'm saying is in reform, a lot of times people think, oh, what we really need is this constitutional amendment for X or Y, right? But if you're a business person like I am, even though we might love the idea, I'm not criticizing the idea of these things and the intention, behind some of these efforts, et cetera. But I'm saying it's not going to happen. Like, for the same reason that we have this partisanship that we want the amendment to solve is the exact reason why we won't pass that amendment. So what we needed to do in this political innovation in my work is find the combination of things, efforts, innovations that are worth doing and doable, right? I don't want to recommend final five voting to all your viewers and to you. And then when you get to the question, which I'm sure you'll ask me soon, well, how would we actually do this? I say, oh, yeah, it's going to be really super hard. Like it won't happen.
Yeah, but I have this great paper about it, and it's presented at academic conferences all the time. So tell me, look, we'll get to that for sure. And one way I'm curious to dig into that is, what's the reaction to your thesis when you speak with DNC, RNC sort of party leaders? On the one hand, as you pointed out, it seems eminently rational that we want more competition. We want more accountability. I mean, that seems like a motherhood and apple pie kind of goal. The logic seems to hold up when you kind of think about it, like, yeah, well, why would anybody want to solve problems if it's just going to get them primaried next time and they'll lose their jobs? What's the reaction when you're talking to these folks that have so much power in the current system, and probably we need to implement any of these innovations?
There's a range of reactions. Let me give you sort of the A, B, C, D of them. So depending on how candid someone wants to be, it'll be one of these. So I would say the most common is just complete dismissiveness of the possibility that it could happen. So therefore, they don't need to engage with it as an idea. Like, we are a two-party system. This is how it works. You're never going to get that done. So, thanks for playing. Like, on your way, okay? Then there is, and then there is sort of the I like it very much, but nobody else is going to like it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so you won't get it done. And then, there certainly are people who say that it will be, destabilizing. I mean, if they get into it, they'll have some legitimate concerns and questions. And but I would say that's not the greatest number of them. I think, and this is not actually a criticism of our senators and representatives as different from the rest of us. So few of us actually think we could change the system. We're just super resigned to it. So we think the best we can do is get a better lesser of two evils or something. Now, the last thing that we see is that some people really see that some of our elected representatives really see that what we're doing isn't working and that it shouldn't be this way. And they have the courage and vision to declare that. And I'll call out two, for example, who wrote the foreword to my book. So I don't know if you noticed this when you read it, but our foreword was written by two newer members of Congress. One, Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, and the other one, Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin. And these two are both veterans. And the core of what they say in the foreword is, how come when we were serving in the military, we were all for America on the same team? And now we want to continue public service, so we run for Congress and we go there. And somehow, even though we're here for the same reasons, we're automatically not just on different teams, but sort of on opposing teams. And what is expressed in this foreword, it shouldn't have to be this way. And Mike Gallagher in particular has really been a leader in calling for this new system of healthy competition. And it is Mike Gallagher and others like him who will show us the way. And what I like to say to people is, we're not reducing jobs in Congress. Why goodness, it's the exact same number of jobs. So assuming you are a very talented, motivated public servant, you can win under this system. This will be a great job. Now you'll win. And now you can really solve problems that you want to solve. You have the freedom to do that. You're not a prisoner of your leadership. You have way more power under this system. You can be accountable to everybody in your district. You don't have to have half of the people hate you all the time. And I think over time we'll get there. But I'll say one thing before I turn it back to you again. You asked me, how do these politicians respond when I talk to them? The fact is, we don't generally go first to lots of existing public officials, because the people who are going to change this are the people. Mm-hmm. I, in particular, as a business person, spend a lot of time talking to other business people. And so you don't go first where people are going to tell you no. You go first where people will, for various reasons, be really resonant with the need for this healthy competition. And then you kind of build from more strength, I would say.
So if we had to break this down into an action plan, like how do we actually make progress here in a measurable way and really see this thing move forward? Because I suspect a lot of people listening to this now and who will watch this video later are going to nod, but then they're going to be like, yeah, but this is like this calcified system. I don't see RCV in my state or my district. I don't see any open primaries, and I don't even know how to get it. What would you say to them?
I would say that, again, shockingly, Final Five voting is at the sweet spot of powerful and achievable. It's at the sweet spot of worth doing and doable. Here's how it happens. It doesn't take a constitutional amendment. It doesn't take an act of Congress. And in half the states, it doesn't matter if you ever get even one current member of the political industrial complex on your side. In Article 1 of the US Constitution gives every state the power to make the rules of how federal elections are run. Which is why, and I say this to your viewers because you guys were probably paying lots of attention to the party primary. You know how the party primaries are like different in every state? That's because the rules are made by every state. And for a while, you're like, how could that be? But that's the way it is also for Congress, although they're reasonably somewhat more similar between states. Point being, each state makes the rules. So you can change them state by state. And in half the states, there is an opportunity for ballot initiatives. And I know, Tom, you're in California, and California is one of the states that can have ballot initiatives. I think you guys call them proposition number, whatever, right? So the citizens can create a group, and I'm simplifying, but collect a certain number of signatures, and you can qualify your ballot measure to appear on the ballot along with candidates. So a way to do it to get Final Five voting in California or any of the other, 26 states that have ballot initiatives is to get a group of citizens and get the signatures and put it on the ballot, and then you run a campaign, which is you run a public awareness campaign. You run a campaign, vote yes for Final Five voting. And if you think about it, people can really resonate easily with this idea of being a consumer and having no choices and wanting to have people competing for their vote. You can sell this. I mean, generally, when you sell it to a broad audience, every state will have to do it differently, but I'll say it's not this hour-long conversation that sells it. It's more choice, more voice, better results. Vote yes on Proposition 7, something like that. And so then, if the ballot measure wins, no matter how many politicians or existing members of the political industrial complex opposed it, the citizens have won, and then that method of voting is changed. Now, there will be some opposition, there may be some court opposition. I'm not saying it's, just because I said it's doable and worth doing, doesn't mean it's easily doable. It's not super easy, but it's totally achievable, completely achievable. So all the people here who are in ballot initiative states should consider if they want to run this ballot initiative in 2022. And they could get started right now, and they can go to my website, which is political-innovation.org. I founded an organization called the Institute for Political Innovation, and get in touch with us there. And we can help. This is one of our key goals, help the listener who wants to take the action, but has not enough time to just figure out where to go from saying that's a great idea, I hope someone else does it, vote for that when someone else gets it there, to being able to be the person who gets it on the ballot, and we can help them do that. So anybody interested, thank you for putting that, politicalinnovation.org. And then in the other half of the states, we need to pass legislation in our state legislatures to change the rules. So it's just a regular bill that your, Assembly and Senate, like we have in Wisconsin, would vote on, and then the governor would sign. Now, some people might say, oh, well, that's never going to happen in those half of the states. And I'll say a couple of things. First, lots of things will happen over time, especially if ballot initiative states are successful in passing it first, and it turns out that it does a really great job, and there's a lot of pressure, so we don't have to do this all at once. The second thing is that, interestingly enough, I can tell you, and I suspect you might agree, there's one thing that people across the ideological spectrum agree on in this world right now, and that is that Congress is broken. Okay, so people don't agree that the presidency is broken or the president is broken, and they don't agree on how their state legislature is doing. We're super divided, but nobody thinks Congress is working. So Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, Independents, politically homeless people can together say to their state legislature, you know what, let's just change these rules for Congress. Let's not fight over the presidency right now. Let's not fight over the state legislature right now. Let's change these rules of the game for the most partisan of bodies and the most dysfunctional, which is Congress, so that they can work together to solve these super substantive issues. And that has resonance. So I believe we will also see some progress in legislative states. And I believe that there are governors, super talented governors around the country, who could be quite happy to sign a landmark piece of legislation that does that moves towards doing what everybody needs doing, which is reinvigorating the ability of Congress to solve problems and create opportunities. If I were a governor, that would seem actually quite politically attractive to me.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll definitely be checking out the political-innovation.org site. Do you know if there's already a proposition sort of in the works in California?
You guys in California, first of all, thank you for passing, I think it was in 2010 when you passed the top two primaries. So you were the first ones to in that way get rid of party primaries. And that is part of what helped us now realize, as innovation works, that, we really need top five. Top two is not as optimized as top five. So it's in some ways good that we have these laboratories of democracy and not everybody does everything at one time. And there is a fabulous organization in California, the Independent Voter Project. And I'm just going to find that website for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Independent Voter Project. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, it's independentvoterproject.org. And they worked on that top two, and they haven't yet, to my knowledge, announced that they would be, working on a final five. But what usually makes something like that possible is getting the startup capital. Right. So point being, you have the expertise and the leadership in California already to win electoral reform ballot initiatives. Add startup capital and leadership advocacy from listeners here, both grassroots and grass tops and grass middles around the state, and you guys could definitely decide you wanted this ballot initiative in 2022 or 2024. Love to see it, and we will be right there to collaborate.
Katherine, let me ask you about a related idea that actually myself and a few other of my friends are working on. Actually, I wonder now if what we're working on needs to be tuned a little bit in light of what you're talking about. But basically, it's called Of the People, and it's like a Kickstarter for Congress. So it's designed to enable not career politicians, but not normal, everyday people, who just work in a regular job, and they're very effective, and they've thought about throwing their hat in the ring, but they don't want to kind of make a big deal out of it. So we make it very easy for them to like create a quick profile and see how much support you can get while you're testing the waters. And so we're literally kind of in development now on that. But part of me wonders, like, well, to your point, if it's sort of this like party duopoly where you're just kind of setting it up so that the extremes of each party get the nomination, we can try and surface more grassroots candidates and more citizen candidates, but they're kind of just like sending folks onto a beach and they're just going to get like mowed down. What's your take? I mean, would you advocate for saying, hey, that's a great idea, but it doesn't matter unless we get the open primary plus RCV?
Tom, I like how you said it. First, I would never not encourage people to run, because that is an extraordinary service to offer yourself up in that crazy campaign process, etc. But since strategy is about choosing what not to do, okay, my co-author of my work is Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, and that's one of his famous quotes, strategy is about choosing what not to do. I do suggest to all of us who care about the ability of the system to deliver results to see the reality. And even, let's say someone out there knows that they themselves are super talented and they just want to solve every problem, and realize that even they are not stronger than the system. Mm-hmm. Which is why sometimes you'll see a lot of people say, well, why doesn't that person run? Why doesn't that person run? Why doesn't that person run? Well, because they actually kind of know in a lot of cases, how crummy the running process is, but actually way more important than how crummy the running process is that after you've gone through all of that, if you somehow do manage to win, you're not going to get anything done. That's not necessarily what talented people want to do, which doesn't mean we don't have talented people. We do. But so long story short, I would say, and by the way, I've looked at your website. I'm not sure I knew it was yours. It's come across my awareness just in the past week. Does that make sense? Have you recently launched it?
We started talking about it in the last couple of weeks, but
okay, well, it already came to me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So totally great. Ofthepeople.co.
That's the one.
Yeah. Okay. But what I would say is, yes, we need critical mass on the system. And then I wouldn't say you do all of that first and complete all 50 states, and only then do you try to get candidates going. There's a bit of a parallel path, but I would try to get ahead on the system so that when these candidates start to run, they have fewer barriers to entry. They won't be spoilers or wasted votes, assuming they're not running, as part of the duopoly, or assuming they want to run somewhat differently than what it takes to get through to an ideological party primary. And also so that when they get to wherever they're going, and again, I'm focused on Congress, they can make a difference. And so I would love to see the energy of all these people and what you guys did for the Andrew Yang that nobody had heard of. I mean, you can say he didn't get as many votes and, all of that, but still, nobody expected him to still be on that debate stage for as long as he was, right?
Correct.
You, Tom, did that. Your viewers did that. That was the power of people saying, we want to look at new solutions to these problems. So having those people now, in part because of this experience, realize the uphill road that is, and say, how we always used to say we need to make the world safe for democracy? Well, we need to make the world safe for innovative candidates and ideas And we need to make the world safe for problem-solving bipartisan action. It's not even safe for that right now. Like, you get vilified if you work that way. So we need to make our country safe for functional democracy. And that means we need to change our system. And I don't know, maybe everybody always says people don't care about process. And I'm like, no, people totally care about process. They care that this process is completely goofy and counterproductive and unfair and ridiculous. People are outraged by it. What they needed to know is that they can change it. And in many ways, I would say that the likelihood of getting a ballot initiative passed in, certain states, and the power that is, because it changes the incentives for all those people from that state, it's sort of a better investment than what it would take to elect, all these different candidates, because then once they get there, maybe they can't, you got them there, but if they can't really do anything, given the broken system when they're there.
Yeah, you're spending good money after bad in a way.
Right, so and people that maybe want to be candidates, how about they be campaigners for Final Five voting and make their name for it and build their networks? And I don't mean in a self-serving way. I mean in all of the best ways that we do this here, which is, I have a great idea, let's bring people in, et cetera. And then, yeah, if it makes it great for them to run, and that's part of why they did it, fantastic. I hope they run. And then the American people can choose. And then, they're either great or they're not. And then they're held accountable at the next one. It's just so exciting to me, the idea of that. So if you'd love to, collaborate a bit on seeing how much interest in the Yang Gang and, now Nerds for Yang / Nerds for Humanity in looking at this process, this very exciting free market politics process, I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, I suspect there is a strong segment of the Yang Gang that would love to get more involved. And I think we've directed a lot of our energy to specific Yang Gang that are running for Congress in this cycle and are planning in 2022. And I think they should continue to do that and push hard. I think what you're talking about is like really rewriting the infrastructure of how the whole thing works, because you could put great people into DC, but they may get primaried and they're going to be motivated. They're just going to be realistic about the incentives, and they might have the best intentions, but they gotta survive. And next thing you know, you're like, well, this is basically the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to take some audience questions before we wrap up. But one question for you, Katherine, about the Of the People thing. So we just started it like in earnest a month ago, and we put the team together of basically folks from the tech industry who are working on voluntary basis on the weekends. A couple of engineers. I'm a product manager. We have a designer. Really, people who built a lot of stuff at scale. And so, Of the People, like as this kind of Kickstarter platform for candidates, was something like, okay, we need authentication. We can make a profile. We need to have analytics. We need to do notifications. Blah 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 blah. Stuff that we are familiar with.
Right. Best practices.
Yeah. So if we wanted to have in our next team meeting, say, well, this Katherine Gehl lady, she seems like she has a lot of cool ideas, and we might have more impact on democracy by, helping advance the cause for open primaries and RCV through propositions in certain states. Is there a need to actually build any technology, or is this mainly like, no, just donate, volunteer time to get the proposition promoted, but we don't actually need to build any products per se?
Okay.
I'm basically saying, like, if you had a free team and you could deploy them and we could build whatever you wanted, like, is there anything you would want us to build? So
I am not an expert at all. I am not the person who has run these campaigns and won. I'm going to mention actually a name of a person we should all be grateful to. Her name's Kara McCormick, and she was one of the key originators of Maine's ranked choice ballot initiative, and then campaign manager that really brought that home. And it's a crazy story. You could interview her sometime. It's just a crazy story of the duopoly, like trying every which way to Sunday and never giving up to make RCV go away. And it's a good thing when both sides don't like it, by the way. So what I'm saying, though, is I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think an offer that attractive has been made necessarily to the people trying to run these ballot initiatives. So if there's no chance of having something, right, like some technology that would help you on this, what's the sense of brainstorming about it? I'd like to connect you to the Independent Voter Project, Chad Peace, which I just mentioned in California. And Kara's super busy right now with Massachusetts. Feel free to support Massachusetts, voterchoicema.org probably. But to talk to them, because I tend to think that, technology can improve anything with a well-designed, needs process and well-designed technology. And Kara just completed, because of COVID in Massachusetts, they got, I don't know if special permission or an exception to collect their signatures online for their ballot initiative. And that's not usually allowed, but you need to stand outside and collect them. And so she collected this extraordinary number of signatures. And that was actually pretty cool because it also spread the word in a way that maybe standing, outside the supermarket to collect the signatures doesn't necessarily. So I think, we should, I would love to have you've been in this, sort of Yang political universe, et cetera, to be part of this political innovation universe, to be in this dialogue. Because again, what we're seeing now is the political innovation universe is growing because people who have been in policy for a long time, it's almost like every one of them over time has come to this view, it's not that we haven't convinced everybody that this is the best policy, it's that there's no political will for it. And so then they start to say, maybe if we really care about our policy, we're going to have to start caring about political will, which means system. And then someone like you, for example, says, we really need these better candidates and we'd like to run on some of Andrew's platform. And then you end up saying, maybe these people aren't going to get elected, or they're not going to be able to do anything once they're elected that, moves us forward. Maybe we need to care about process. And then I would say, even again, in the existing system, people who are Democrats and Republicans right now start realizing that it really is not working. And they begin to think, maybe we could still be Democrats and Republicans, but just be really getting the job done. And they start to care about process. I believe that we're all going to come together and say, we have this great Constitution and a method to amend it when it's not as great as it needs to be, which we have done in the past and need to do from time to time. But now we also have the rules of the game, the day-to-day rules of how elections are run, and then legislating, which is another story, which I also talk about in the book. There's a lot of fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in the book. And they're going to say, we need to care about this stuff. And that's how political innovation is going to grow. But it means that someone like you will still continue to care about the other piece, but you'll also do some process. I might do process full time pretty much, but then, policy people keep doing their policies, but they'll know that they want to say, yes, this is a good change, to go to final five voting. And I think that's how we move it forward. So I'll give you an example, perhaps, I'm sure we're running out of time, but in Wisconsin, where I live, we have a legislative effort and for final five voting, and we have bipartisan support. We have people who support, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, who will say, we don't agree on candidates, we don't agree on policy, we don't donate to the same people, et cetera. But we agree on this. We agree on this way to work together. And isn't that what we need to do in democracy, which is agree on the method which we will use, the incentives which will drive us to come together in a diverse country with difficult challenges that include trade-offs. I mean, look, if our problems were easy, even the dysfunctional system could do that, right? Got hard problems, and they require, highly functioning like structures and then incentives that are aligned with getting it done. And so we should all do some process. So I will email you ASAP to be in touch.
I love it. Yeah. I'm all for it. And I'm already thinking about the conversation with some of the people, co-founders, about how do we just make sure the time we're putting in is going to have the maximum impact. And I don't think they're conflicting visions. I think they're kind of symbiotic in a way.
They're sort of not conflicting when we do both of them, meaning if we change the system and there's no good candidates, I mean, it's
exactly
lovely that this would come together and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And that makes sense.
I love it. Last question before we wrap up. Let's fast forward a year from now and you're back in the Nerd Zone and we're talking. What do you want to say we got done to convince ourselves that we're making progress versus talking about it indefinitely?
How about this? Let's not even wait a year. Let's say if we were talking in November, I want to say that Alaska, North Dakota, and Arkansas passed Final Four legislation, top 4 open primaries, ranked choice voting general elections. That's what I want to say for November. And then if it is the year from now, I want to be able to say to you, if you have viewers in these 10 states and list them off, they all have active, not just fly by night, but active, structured, legitimate, substantive efforts for Final 5 legislation through their state legislature or by ballot initiative. I want to be able to say we've got 10 that are that are moving towards that, because here's a really interesting thing. Not only do we have to do it state by state, but we don't have to wait for all 50 states to do it to see the benefits. Let's say we just had these 3 states. Those 3 states give us 6 senators and, I don't know, maybe 20 representatives or something. But those 6 senators, they'll likely be Democrats and Republicans, because it's not about changing who wins, it's about changing what the winners do. So in this climate, they could be Democrats and Republicans, but they will have the freedom that the others elected under the normal current incentives don't have to work across the aisle. And I'm not saying create some utopia, but it creates a fulcrum of problem-solving oriented elected officials in Congress who are responding to their entire districts and know that they need to deliver results, or the way is open for new competition in their state in a way it isn't in the other states. They'll act differently.
Totally. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, that small coterie of people could be the ultimate tiebreakers.
The fulcrum.
Yeah.
Leverage point.
Yeah, they'll be the gang of 10 or whatever. Yeah. And they're going to be the ones that actually do the reasonable thing, not because the other candidates or representatives are unreasonable, but their hands are tied because they're kind of held hostage by the current system.
And also, there's all that safety in numbers. So let's say they were 6 and they said, look, I really want this immigration deal and I really want this immigration deal, and they're way apart from each other. But let's do this one, the one that there's been agreement on behind closed doors for, about 2 decades now. They sort of form this fulcrum. And then others say, since it has a prayer, I think we'll join.
Yeah.
Nothing ever has a prayer right now that's bipartisan. But once something starts, people come to it. So you can begin to change the incentives. And again, I'm not crazy. As I said a moment ago, This does not create some democratic utopia. Like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government out there, except when compared to all the others.
Mm-hmm.
If we have these kinds of incentives, final five voting in, we will still have a democracy. And a democracy in, with tough trade-offs and diverse country, et cetera, it's hard. Democracy is messy and hard. But with the right incentives, we can have, what we currently have is we have messy, hard, and bad results. With the right incentives, we can have messy, hard, and some very good results to show for it. That is what utopia for democracy would look like. Messy, hard, good results.
That sounds better than what we have today. So I'll take that. Yeah, Katherine, thank you so much. For those of you who are watching and want to get into more detail, remember that there is a book that Katherine wrote with, for all you business nerds out there, one of the gods of business, Michael Porter, on the politics industry, how political innovation can break the gridlock and save our democracy. And then, of course, check out Katherine's website, politicalinnovation.org, if you want to roll up your sleeves and maybe help with a proposition in your state, or try and move the ball forward. Because as many of us are energized by candidates and leaders and fresh ideas, if they're playing in a game where their hands are always tied, even Andrew Yang can only get so much done. So hopefully we can take a systemic kind of innovation approach, as well as support great candidates and great leaders, and the combination can bring our democracy, to a place it's never been before, which would be historic. So who knows? Maybe we'll be talking 5-10 years from now, Katherine, and thinking about how we can tell our grandkids that we did our part.
I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? And that is the story of America. That is the story of it. And the people who did these things before were just like us. And so it's up to us.
I love it. Katherine, anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I've never asked this before, but you guys are so amazing online. I'm going to just say, could you guys follow me on Twitter?
Of course.
I mean, because you guys are big on that. It's
what's the handle?
I think I'm at Katherine Gehl. Yes, I am. I'm at Katherine Gehl. KatherIneGehl. And that's where, I am spreading not just the, things I think, but words from the other super great people in this political innovation industry and everything. And so I just love it if you would follow me, because really people don't know about this yet. And you saw that with Andrew. You're trying to get people to know, here he is and here's what he stands for. I know you've never heard of him, but just because you've never heard of him doesn't mean it's, he's not the greatest thing. And that's what we're trying to do with these ideas. Because I think sometimes people are like, if there was really that great of an idea out there, I would have heard of it already.
Mm-hmm.
We got to say, no, just because you haven't heard of it, it's really great. So that would be lovely.
Yes, go give Katherine a follow. Yang Gang does not disappoint when it comes to online organizations. So hopefully we'll not only follow her, please retweet some of her stuff, help her get the word out. And Katherine, I hope we'll get you back on the show to continue the conversation. I can tell from the chat that a lot of people were saying it's been super refreshing, and they feel a little bit more hopeful that there's potentially a plan to kind of get us in the right direction for the long run. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up by saying goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.